Well, hello there, challengees. Welcome to the Always Better Challenge Show, the show that helps you take steps today that lead to being better and happier tomorrow. I'm Joe Bedford, your host. I'm very excited to be here. And as always, and I'm sort of tightening things up and sort of learning how I want to do the show, rather than tell you what the show is about, I'm going to jump right into our quote, which is, of course, going to tell you what the show is about. You've probably figured out that's what I've been doing, so that's what I'm going to do today. So today's quote, this comes from Charles Dickens. Annual income, 20 pounds. Annual expenditure, 19.6. Result, happiness. Annual income, 20 pounds. Annual expenditure, 20 pound ought and 6. Result, misery. So yes, today we're going to talk about money. Can I sing the song? Money, 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 money. I've been dying to sing on this show. I'm not sure why, because now you've heard what I sing like. But anyway, so yeah, we're going to talk about money today. I do want to start off by saying I have watched and listened to shows on this topic before, and so due to legal concerns, I do want to make sure that I do give a disclaimer. I am not a financial professional or advisor, and so I am not attempting to give you financial advice on this show. Look at this as information and ideas. I'm not giving advice. Please do consult a financial professional with any questions that you may have or anything you want to get cleared up. But we're going to talk about money. So I want to begin by asking you some questions. What is your net worth? How much savings do you have? Is it enough? Is it enough to weather a storm, a reasonably expected storm? How about your retirement savings? Are they where they need to be? Are they where they need to be for you to have the retirement that you want, or to have any retirement at all for that matter? How about insurance? Do you have the right amount of insurance? Do you have insurance at all? I'm thinking like life insurance mostly there. Do you need it? Do you not need it? Do you know whether you need it or not? How about your overall financial situation? Can you tell me, is it getting better? Is it getting worse? Are you on the right track? Are you on the wrong track? And here's a great question that encompasses a lot of them, and I know this is a question that a lot of folks ask. Can you answer this? Where is your money going? So I've asked you a bunch of questions, and the reason for that is I want you to be aware of how hearing those questions makes you feel. Does that make you feel anxious and worried and thinking, oh boy, yeah, I either don't know the answers to some of those or a lot of those. I don't really know where my money is going. I don't really have a clear picture of where I'm at and a clear plan to get where I want to go. Well, if that's the case, then I do very much hope that today's show will be beneficial to you. We'll talk about some of those things and how to address some of those things, because those are questions that we do want to, at least be able to answer and be real about those. Whether maybe the answers aren't exactly what we want, but if that's the case, we can make a plan to improve things. So we're going to return to another one of my very common themes on this show. I've mentioned this a million times before in reference to other things, and it certainly applies with money as well. Track it, track it, track it, track it. How many times have I said it? What gets measured gets managed. Tracking it gives you information. Tracking allows you to have the information that you need to make a plan. So track it. The good news is that's easier than ever to do with our modern technology. There's a million software tools, apps, websites that you can use to track your money. I'll talk a little bit later about the one that I use, but there's certainly plenty of options out there. You can use pencil and paper if you want to too. That's certainly an option too. It doesn't matter what the tool is as long as it works for you and that you use it. So that's the thing. Get the tool that you are going to actually use. So I use money tracking software. I use a web app, which they also have a iPhone and iPad app. Now, again, I'll talk about that more in a moment. I use that in combination with a spreadsheet. And my spreadsheet, I call it a budget, and I guess that's a good enough word for what it is. Budget slash record of spending. So what I do is on the spreadsheet, I've got I do it for a year. I've got the months of the year along the top. So, each month is a column. And then for my rows, I've got my categories, both my income categories and my expense categories. And so that's the thing. I've always been had a money management type mindset, I suppose, from the time I was very young, a very young adult out on my own. Like most young adults, a lot of it was by necessity. I didn't have much money, so I knew I had to make the most out of what I had. So I was really careful with, keeping track of what I was spending and planning and so forth. And so these are the techniques that I use are techniques that I've developed over I guess 30 years now, and I've got it down to what works really well for me. And this spreadsheet idea really works well for me. I love being able to see my year at a glance. And like I say, it's sort of a combination. So, like here we are right now in November. So if I'm looking at my 2017 spreadsheet, most of it is going to be historical information. It's going to be the actual information from the past months on what I actually did make and spend. And then for the future months, that's going to be the plan or projected income and expenses. And of course, I've got, the nice thing about spreadsheets is it totals up all the columns and the rows for you. So I can see for each month whether I was in the black or in the red as far as were my expenses more than my income or less. And then totals out for the categories for the year, so I can see what I spent on each category for the year. And then, of course, I get a grand total there at the end of the year with the big number where I really want to see for the year, have I moved forward or backward? Am I in the black or am I in the red? So that works great for me. I know my dear wife, I think, disagrees with me a little bit on this as far as what works for her. And she is an accountant, so keep that in mind. And she likes, and I'm speaking for her here, so I'm going to do my best to say what she said to me in the past. She likes reports. So she likes to see like a cash flow report and a profit and loss statement and those types of things. And there's obviously nothing wrong with those tools. And I do look at those tools. Again, the nice thing about the software that you use is you can usually generate those reports quite easily. But for whatever reason, the way my mind works, the budget, the yearly budget spreadsheet, that's my main tool for figuring out where I'm at. That just for whatever reason, that gives me the picture that is useful to me and helpful to me, gives me the information that I want to see in a way that I can understand it and that it makes sense to me. So, there's basically, I guess, two main tools that you want to use here. Because the budget definitely isn't the whole story. And one report I definitely do look at, and you can, as I say, you can generate this with your financial software. I actually have my own that I do as well, and I update it once a month, is a balance sheet. I mentioned that in the beginning when I was asking questions. What's your net worth? So your balance sheet is where on one sheet of paper, you're going to list out all of your assets and all of your liabilities. And then, of course, your net worth is your assets minus your liabilities. So your assets include, the obvious things, money that you have in the bank, investment accounts, your cars, your home, the property that you have in your home. You might have to estimate a value of that. So all of those things are assets. And then your liabilities obviously are any loans, mortgage, credit card debt, anything like that that's in the liability column. And then at the end of that, that's going to tell you your net worth. So your balance sheet, think of that as a snapshot or a picture of where you are right now. That is a moment in time, the balance sheet. And like I say, I update mine once a month, so I take that picture once a month to know where I'm at. The budget or spending plan or whatever you want to call it, like I say, I almost think the word budget isn't necessarily the right word for the document that I have, but that's what I call it. But that is, not a snapshot, but that's looking at the past and planning for the future. Another very important point I want to make about the budget or the spending plan or whatever we're going to call it, because I think a lot of people have a very negative idea or mindset when you say the word budget. I think the word budget makes people think of the word diet in relation to food, and they think about, a budget is about cutting back on everything. And let's try to shift that mindset, because to me that is not what a budget is at all. A budget is not a straitjacket or a burden that's on me. It's the exact opposite. The budget is information and a plan. It's where I decide what I want to spend my money on. It's not necessarily that it's cut. Maybe when you're planning, you decide that there are areas that you want to spend more money on. Maybe your personal development, for example. I can think that that's a great, place that you might want to spend a little extra money, because that, to me, that's more of an investment. Maybe on healthier food, you decide you're willing to spend a little more, and that's something that we'll talk about later when we discuss, being careful about false economy. But so it's a plan. It's a realistic plan. For things that are fun, like entertainment or whatever, just you plan. You figure out an amount. Okay, this is an amount where I'm going to be able to do the things that I want to do, and it fits the budget. Because that's the thing. Yeah, at the end of the day, it does have to fit. Like Charles Dickens said above, we do not want to live above our means. And so the budget is the plan to help us make sure that we're doing that, and to allocate the money that we do have where we want it to go and where it's going to do the most good for us and give us the better, happier life that we want. So it's not a burden. It's a useful tool, and it's something to be excited about, not something to dread or anything like that. So as far as budget categories, and this is the nice thing, you can tailor this to yourself. You can use as many or as few categories as you want. You can use whichever categories you want. This will take a little thought, I suppose, and a little mindfulness. Just think about the categories that are going to be useful to you. What categories are going to give you information that's going to be helpful in making decisions? Use as many categories as you need. I would say don't use more than you need. Use as few as you can get by with and still get the benefit that you want, because obviously that's going to be simpler and easier to administer. That's one of the things I've tweaked over the years, is that my budget used to have a lot more categories, and over time I've narrowed those down to the essential few. You can probably brainstorm this yourself, but just to give you some ideas on some of the categories that I track. This is not necessarily an exhaustive list, but these are categories that are going to apply to, most of these are going to apply to most people, I think. Food is one category. Home expense, whether that's household, mortgage, rent, anything like that. Taxes, I break that down more than most people just because I want to know. So I look at even sales tax, as well as obviously income tax, Social Security tax, basically all the taxes I break down. Auto expense, anything related to your auto, including your car payment, gas, insurance, maintenance. Utilities, self-explanatory, your electric, water, sewer, telephone, computer, anything you put in that utilities category. Entertainment, anything you do for fun. Gifts, anything that you're giving to someone else. Insurance, whether that's auto insurance, life insurance, homeowners insurance, renters insurance, disability insurance, anything in the insurance category. Healthcare, your doctor, pharmacist, anything along those lines. I break clothing down into a separate category. That's just me. For some of you, that might belong in another category just fine. And I have a sports category that might not apply to some of you, although I hope it does. But that's for things like my gym membership, any entry fees for races that I do, sporting equipment, anything along those lines. One thing that I do that I've found helpful, because subcategories can be helpful sometimes too. I don't do many subcategories, but I do a few. The main one that occurs to me I do is within food. So I have an overall food category, but then within that I do break it down into some subcategories. I break it down into groceries, restaurants or eating out, and I do break alcohol down into a third category. Now, I don't drink anymore. My wife still drinks. I got used to tracking that back when I was still participating, but I continue to track that because I like to know how much money's going there, how much is going to eating out, and then how much is going to actually buying groceries that are prepared at home. So that's what works for me. So tweak those, use those, pick the ones that are going to work the best for you. Now then, I want to think about possible, what am I trying to say, obstacles or objections you might have to if you're someone that doesn't track their money like this. You might be thinking it takes a ton of time. I want to reassure you that it really doesn't. And again, you can track things as closely as you want to and kind of spend as much or as little time on it as you want to. I maybe spend a little more time on it than some folks because I kind of enjoy it. I like to really dig in there and really just have a good plan and try to think of new ideas as far as, just basically things that are going to help me to get to my goals that I want to get to better. But you can keep it pretty simple. The nice thing with the modern software is that most of it will automatically download all of your transactions from your bank accounts, your credit cards, and things like that. And I suppose that's a tip. And this is one, and I'm sort of going off on a tangent here, but this occurred to me, and I think it's a good thing to talk about. I don't really use cash, and the reason is that using credit cards or debit cards and the bank account does make it easier for me to track. It's one less step where those transactions are automatically just downloaded into my software that I use. And with cash, that can get lost. Now, I know a lot of financial gurus are going to have some trouble with that advice. I'm not going to say they're wrong either, but they're going to say that spending cash is helpful in that it's maybe easier to overspend when you're not using cash. Certainly a valid concern, but for me, I've decided that and I'm pretty mindful about it, so I feel like that doesn't affect me badly, and I feel like I get the good benefit out of it making it simpler and easier for me to track everything. So I do not use cash. I almost never use cash. And you can use, I was going to say you could use PayPal in place of cash a lot of times, and that's still trackable, but I guess a lot of places you can't, so that might not be the best idea. But yeah, so getting back to what I was talking about, it really, it takes a little time to set it up. What does it take? Maybe an hour, maybe, to set things up. And then once you've got it set up, it takes now I will say, well, at least I would recommend, I check in once a day. That way it's just going to take a minute or two. Pull up your whatever tracking that you're using for your money and just take a look at it. With the software, again, a lot of times it will automatically assign categories, or at least it will guess a category, but you may want to make sure that is definitely putting that in the category that you want and reassign it if it's not. The other advantage of checking it every day is you're going to be able to very quickly see any problems like unauthorized charges or mistakes, anything like that. I had it happen recently where I went to a restaurant to get something and they actually ran the charge through twice. I was able to catch that very quickly and get that fixed. So yeah, I do recommend a daily commitment, but if you do that, it won't be a huge task. You can certainly do it less frequently too, but the thing is, if you wait a week, then I think it's going to take maybe longer to do. I like doing it daily, but your mileage may vary as the case goes. Do what works for you. You also want to, and I talked about this with time management, where I do sort of a weekly review to sort of take the bigger picture view. And you want to try to do that with your finances as well. I guess I do that more monthly, which makes sense if you think about my spreadsheet that I talked about, where I'm going to update the previous month once it's complete with the amounts that were actually spent and made. So I think that's a good time to sort of go over things, think about your goals. Are you reaching your goals? Are there areas where you want to look at trying to spend less money or more money, questions like that. Just sort of taking, again, I'm a big believer in, occasionally taking a step back and looking at the big picture. So I do recommend that. What other financial advice do I have for you? First of all, and this is one I bet you've all heard a million times, and this goes to Charles Dickens at the beginning, where you want to have some money left over. You want to live below your means, not above. It's going to be less stress. It's going to be a happier life. And the thing is, living above your means, it's not sustainable forever, is it? Sooner or later, you're going to have to pay the piper. So you want to live below your means. And so the technique, or the trick, tip, whatever you want to call it, is pay yourself first. I'm sure you've heard that. You want to set aside a certain amount of money to savings, whether that's retirement savings, cash savings, so more liquid savings. You want to have both of those. I'll talk about those. Well, maybe now's as good a time as any. I mean, we talked about at the beginning of the show, one of the questions was, do you have enough set aside for an emergency that could occur, a reasonable amount. I've heard, a lot of folks say 6 months expenses is a good amount to have. I guess 12 would be better if you can do it. And so, you can sort of think of this as buckets, and that would be sort of your first bucket. That's a very liquid bucket of cash that you can get to very quickly. And there's different levels there. I mean, a checking account would be very liquid. Something like PayPal is liquid as well. Savings account is still pretty liquid. You can get into CDs, which, does anybody do CDs anymore with the interest rates? But that would be a little less liquid. But we're talking about money that you can get to quickly or fairly quickly. And then you've got your retirement savings, investment accounts, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, index funds, things like that. That's less liquid. And then we've got other things that I don't even like to consider when I'm thinking about. Because you've got other assets, but they're not liquid at all, like your home. I mean, that's an asset, but you have to have a place to live. So it's not like you can sell your home. I mean, yeah, you can sell your home and get a cheaper home to free up some cash that way. But it's not a very liquid asset, and you got to have a home. Well, hopefully you have a home. So getting back to my point, you want to save up in that very liquid bucket and decide an amount. 6 months living expenses, certainly a good goal to shoot for, and so get that funded and then keep that there to serve as your little cushion there. That's a good idea. Pay yourself first. Pay yourself into your liquid bucket, and your less liquid retirement bucket is what I think of that as well. Another piece of advice, you know this. Consumer debt, pardon my, sucks. It sucks. Credit card debt, high interest debt, it just sucks the life out of your financial life. It is such a burden. So you want to make that one of your top priorities. I mean, the only thing I can think of off the top of my head that I would prioritize over consumer debt is making sure you're paying your taxes, because Uncle Sam doesn't fool around. You can go to jail for not paying that stuff. So that's always your number one priority. But once you've got that, getting that consumer debt paid off, get a plan. I'm not going to go into detail now. There are plenty of resources out there. Dave Ramsey, who I'll talk about later, gives some good advice in that. The snowball idea, paying your minimums on all your payments and putting any extra towards, he says, the smallest debt, because he wants you to get a win. Other experts will tell you pay off the highest interest debt. I've done it both ways. It's like logically the highest interest paying off the highest interest first makes sense, but from an emotional standpoint, Dave's idea makes more sense. And I almost think in this case the emotion trumps it. The getting the win is going to keep you on track and keep you focused. I think he knows what he's talking about when he says that. I'll just put it that way. So consumer debt sucks. You want to spend as little as you can on depreciating assets, things that go down in value after you buy them. So for example, buying a home, which hopefully will appreciate in value over time, that's great. But things like cars do not, for the most part, go up in value. They go down, and eventually to almost zero. So, and I know some folks who are not totally on board with this idea. I'm not going to mention my wife by name. But totally blanking on the word I'm trying to think of there, but my goal has always been to be careful about what I spend on things like cars that are just going to go down in value. And I'm not going to say I've never bought a brand new car. I have, but I doubt I ever will again. Even if you get one that's just 2 or 3 years old, where a lot of that depreciation has already happened, that's so much a better deal. And me personally, I like nice cars, but I think of my car as a tool to get me from point A to point B, really. So that's just me. figure out what your big levers are. And by that, I mean the things that you have the most, where you can make the biggest difference with your spending or with your planning. For me, by far, it was food. That's one of the areas that we spend the most on. That may be the biggest area that we spend the most. And obviously, things that we talked about earlier, and it's one of the reasons I break out restaurants and alcohol, because those are things that obviously run that total up really quick. And so I know that if I see a month where I want to spend less, I know that's something that I can very easily do. Say, okay, we maybe need to rein it in a little bit on the eating out and drinking out. That's the thing. We talked about that in the alcohol episode. Drinking alcohol is expensive enough at home. If you drink out, it's twice as expensive. So that's another sort of compromise you can make sometimes. Well, maybe we'll drink at home a little bit more this month to tighten things up. So figure out what those big levers are. The other one for me is taxes, and there are some things that you can do. As a business owner, I may have a little more discretion there, where I can put money into my SEP IRA, and that has that brings my taxes down. Obviously, it's not a 1-for-1. I don't putting $1 in doesn't give me $1 in tax savings, but so you have to look at that and figure out what makes sense. But that is another lever that I have to pull. We've already talked about auto can be a big area, and your home. Those are ones that you can't move around as much month to month, but you can make decisions up front that make sense on where you live and what car you drive, things like that. Obviously, the other levers that you can pull are your discretionary categories, things like entertainment, clothing for me, and sports for me. Those are areas where I do have some discretion, and I can tweak those a little bit. But food and taxes are the big ones. That's the thing. That's where I can make the most difference. It's that old the 80-20 rule. Look for the 20% of categories that can give you 80% of your results. A lot of folks, when they talk about money advice, they give advice that is like worrying about pennies and the dollars take care of themselves. That sounds good in theory, but sometimes I think that can turn out to be much ado about nothing. I mean, if we're worrying about like reusing sandwich bags, reusing sandwich bags might be great from an environmental perspective. I think you could make a better argument there than for saving money. I mean, how much is that going to save? How much difference is that going to make? How many different little tiny things like that are you going to have to come up with to make a meaningful difference? I say concentrate on the big stuff. I'm not saying ignore the little stuff, but I wouldn't say spend a lot of time or energy on it. And if you want to have a latte, go have a latte, for goodness sake. But be aware, be mindful. That's always good. I talked earlier about the false economies and the food health thing. That's the one that occurs to me right off the bat. Be careful about saving money in the short term that's going to cost you even more in the long term. So I think of things like, if you go to Little Caesars and get the $5 hot and ready every day, you're going to save money on your food, but that's probably not going to be great for your health. And if you have health care expenses down the road as a result of that, those are probably going to be way more than you ever thought about saving by eating pizza every day. Extreme example, I know, but that's how I think about that. The other false economy is, and you want to be thoughtful and mindful about this. Maybe sometimes it is better to buy the cheapest thing, but maybe with other expenditures, it's better to buy a little, spend a little bit more and get a little higher quality that's going to last longer and that is going to be more economical, better value in the long term. So that's always a balancing act and something to think about and be mindful about. So just a few more quick really tips here. I'm not going to go into these in any depth. Retirement planning, again, I'm not a financial advisor. You're probably not either. For most folks, I say dollar cost averaging into a good index fund is probably a good way to go. You don't need a financial advisor to do that. That's something you can do yourself. If you have an employee-sponsored retirement plan and and you can get a match, you want to maximize the match, that's free money. The problem you can run into is if your employer-sponsored plan has crappy investment options. They don't have index funds. They've got expensive options and options that aren't that good. So there you just have to look at it. You're still getting a lot of money if they're doing a match, so you might want to at least maximize the match. And then if you have any extra funds you want to put somewhere else, maybe you could look at that. Life insurance, again, I'm not going to go into that in any great detail except to say that, first of all, if you don't have a family that depends on, if you don't have dependents, it may not be that important to have. Term life insurance is the most affordable and is probably best for most people who need life insurance. I'm not going to say that whole life insurance is never a good choice. I don't like to say never. A lot of experts will say that. I'm going to say term probably is best for most people. Check with a life insurance professional on that. That's about all I've got to say about that. The other point I want to make is that I do not use a financial advisor or planner myself. I have worked with folks in the past. I feel up to managing my own at this time. If you don't, the only advice I'm going to give you is to use a fee-based planner. This means this is someone, you pay them a set dollar amount to give you advice. The reason you want to do that is then they do not have a vested interest if it's a percentage or a commission type thing where they get paid for making financial recommendations to you. That is a conflict of interest, and I don't like that. I want someone who has a fiduciary interest in my best interests. So, real quick, my resource of the day is Mint, M-I-N-T. You can access that at mint.com. They've also got an iPhone app and an iPad app. That is the software that I use to track my finances. There's lots of other options out there. I guess Microsoft Money is still one, Quicken. There's a million of them. Mint is the one I used. I've used some of the other ones and stopped using them for different reasons, and Mint is the one that I currently use, and it is free, by the way. For tools, the only tool I could think to mention as far as a physical tool is Dave Ramsey has some good books. I don't have the titles off the top of my head, but he gives really common sense advice. He's also got a radio show most of you probably know, and you can get that if you're not in the Nashville area. They can get that on the podcast too, so you can listen to that. That is a good recommendation. So that's it for today. I hope today's show was helpful. And what's the quote from the Bible? But people get it wrong. It's not that money is the root of all evil. It's that the love of money is the root of all evil. Money is a tool that helps us to do the things we want to do. We can do a lot of good with money. We can be philanthropic with our money. So, let's not think of it as a bad thing. It's bad or good depending on what we do with it. So please, if you haven't already, subscribe to the show, share it with your friends. Please consider signing up for our daily motivational emails. That's free, and you can do that at alwaysbetterchallenge.com. Keep your questions and suggestions coming. Feel free to join our Facebook group if you haven't already. That's it for today. That wraps it up. I'm Joe Bedford, the host of the Always Better Challenge, thanking you so much for watching and reminding you to go out there and make it happen.